welcome to a very special video. I am joined by a pretty legendary figure in the chess world, Grandmaster Susan Polgar. Probably someone who needs no introduction. I might have to have a list of accomplishments going down the screen. I'll edit that in after the fact. But Susan, thanks so much for joining today.
Oh, thank you for having me. My pleasure being here. And hi, everyone.
So Susan just released her new autobiography, Rebel Queen. I'll share all information in the video description, how to get it. But can you explain what the book is about and also what kind of motivated you to write the book?
Absolutely. It's my memoirs, looking back from even before I started playing chess, how my parents met all the way, all the obstacles I had to overcome, and where I got today, including my coaching career. Well, my motivation with the book was to inspire everyone and to spread a message that nothing is impossible. That's really the message. And, if you have your passion, you're willing to work hard at it and persevere, sky is the limit.
And I've started listening to the book on Audible, and it feels like a movie. Just the amount of detail that you go into from your childhood and how you first learned the game. And I feel like there needs to be more of this in the chess world of the stories beyond the board, rather than just the.
Thank you. And actually, one of the motivations for the book was to get it on the big screen, to motivate as many people as possible through my story, that if I could do it, anyone can.
That's great. Hopefully one of these days it will turn into a movie. That would be really cool. But I guess I wanted to focus, especially for this video, some of the best moments on the board in your chess career. And then hopefully that will motivate people to hear the rest of your life story and get the book. So I do have some of your best games of all time that I was asking you last night, some of the most memorable games to show, maybe some of the most memorable moves and combinations. And you mentioned this game where you were white against Ljubojević. And can you set the stage for this game?
Absolutely. It's still to this day one of my favorite memories in my chess career. It's because it was the first time that I was invited to a super tournament with Anatoly Karpov, Wolf Anderson, Ljubojević himself, who was a world number 3 in his peak and still world number 6 at the time of this game. So it was a huge privilege and honor to be invited to this tournament. And at the same time, Ljubojević himself, who is he's generally a very nice guy, and I consider him a friend. But before the tournament and before we really got to know each other, he was kind of objecting in the media before the tournament, what are women doing in such a prestigious tournament? And so I was kind of extra motivated to give the answer to that. And I think this is the game that is just the most appropriate answer. And okay, let's start looking at the game.
Feel free to play
The
through the
beginning was nothing very fascinating. So I think he chose this response to my queen pawn start to get me out of my book. I think he wanted to avoid main theoretical lines, and that's why he played this offbeat line.
And we should mention, what year was this?
This is, I believe, 1987.
Okay, so this is well before the age of chess engines and ChessBase. And,
yes.
I assume you were working with coaches and reading books then?
Yeah, it was very different times, obviously, unlike today when everybody uses engines, even on our smartphones.
Sure.
And there is a database of millions and millions of games. It was just the very, very beginning of that. We did have ChessBase starting the mid-80s, but they had very limited number of games, very limited information. I think the only, or one of the main engines was Fritz at the time.
Okay.
Even without numbers, Fritz 8 or 10 was exactly. So it was a very different time. So we mostly trying to use our own brains and come up with the best conclusions we can during our prep.
Gotcha. And you had mentioned right before we started recording, there's an interesting moment in the opening where you violate principles.
Yes, that's coming up
So,
very soon. So for now, we're just developing, following opening principles, developing pieces.
very standard setup for white.
So far, nothing very unusual. And this was the first interesting crossroad in the game when I have the two options to recapture. Obviously, the natural one is to recapture with the bishop. Or what I did in the game, which is kind of an exception from the rule, when I voluntarily doubled up my pawns. That's generally not something I recommend. And even in this particular case, it's a matter of taste, I would say. So as compensation for the doubled pawns, I have pair of bishops, of course, just like in a typical Ruy Lopez when white trades the bishop for the knight. And I wanted to hope that maybe one day that second f-pawn can aid my attack on the king's side by advancing it. That's not how the game turned out, but it could have been one of the options. So here my opponent played something very logical and took on d4 to make sure that my double pawn stays where it is. And he has the pawn majority, 4 pawns against 3 on the queen side. And here he played queen b6. So this is a big crossroad again, to trade or not to trade. That's always a big question in chess. And given that I have the inferior pawn structure already, it's typically not to my interest to trade queens, and therefore I decided not to. But this is another kind of exception from the rules moment, and it's definitely a good choice what I did. I brought my queen back in front of my bishop.
Which looks very disharmonious.
Yes, it's don't do it at home kind of thing. This is an exception from the rule. Generally, we do not put a major piece like a queen in front of an undeveloped bishop. However, this is one of those examples when we think ahead more than one move, 2-3 moves ahead, and I had clearly decided that I wanted to fianchetto my bishop eventually and not develop it on the diagonal that it's on right now, c1 through h6. So he castled, so far everything is kind of normal other than the things I pointed out. And I played b3 to make sure my bishop gets out sooner than later, and then because of it my rook from the queen side can also get into the game.
It seems like another reason to not trade queens is the fact that long term you have more potential to attack, given
Absolutely.
Like this bishop.
And of course the queen is the most important piece for an attack.
Would you say that like growing up and also like in your prime, you were leaning more towards attacking chess than like positional or endgames, or?
That's a very good question because, yes, I love to attack, but ultimately I think partly due to my personality, I was more of a positional player. I very much enjoyed kind of grinding and accumulating small advantages and preventing opponents' counterplay, which actually this game is a very good example of. This is kind of my typical style that I'm starting kind of safe and slow and slowly building up my attack and preventing the opponent's counterplay. As you'll see in a little bit, at one stage, really my opponent couldn't do much but go back and forth with his king in the corner.
I don't want to spoil too much, but I think this game is a great example of the slow positional build-up and then also the amazing tactical like genius finish. So yeah, maybe we can see how the game unfolded in this middle game.
Okay, so let's continue. He played knight to c5, which is improving the position of the knight, very logical move. I played rook e1. This is a move that I think it's a very important lesson. One of my coaches told me that there are situations when you're not sure where a certain piece belongs, like my bishop, for example, on c1, whether it should go to b2 or a3. However, it's pretty certain that my rook belongs on e1 on the open file. So make the moves first that you're kind of sure about if you're still undecided about certain other pieces. So I think that's definitely a good advice to go it in that order.
The concept of staying flexible, basically.
Absolutely. And in this particular case, it's also gaining a tempo by attacking black's bishop right now.
Sure.
Which, of course, he protected. And here was another interesting moment. I played the natural bishop b2, and you may wonder why I didn't go to a3. And the reason was I didn't like queen a5 answer to that and being chased back. And you'll see in a moment why this is an important point. So I played the bishop b2, and here he played a5, which is a very, very typical type of idea, to then try to play a4 and disrupt my harmonious pawn structure, pawn chain on the queen side.
Sure.
And here, it's, I think, one of the key moves of the game, which I think you may have been surprised about, that after I just put my bishop on b2, I decided to move it yet again to a3.
It's yet another instance in this game of breaking principles and
Exactly,
I think
wasting time, so to say.
yeah,
But
a lot of amateurs would be surprised looking at such a game and seeing all these weird moves, but
exactly. So the whole point is, and what I mentioned just a minute ago, that I was concerned if I went to a3 immediately of the queen to a5 move.
Sure.
But now that that pawn is there, obviously the queen can no longer go there. And the point is that if black would follow up with his plan by pushing a4, I could play b4. And that is why I needed my bishop on a3 to support that b4 square.
makes sense.
Chasing his knight away and also making sure the a file doesn't open up. Okay, so he played bishop f8, opening the e file for his rook. And here I played knight to e4. So here I took the opportunity, forcing my opponent to trade, which means that I can undouble my pawn. And he took with the knight from f6. I took back. So now it's clear that white is doing well because I have no more double pawn, and I have the advantage of pair of bishops and space advantage, and the d6 pawn is somewhat of a target in the long term on that half open file. So this is a very interesting moment because my opponent played a very natural move, bringing his rook to the middle, protecting the d6 pawn. But actually it's a mistake, and after this it was really, really hard for black to find any active plan. And I can tell you from experience, it's extremely, extremely unpleasant when you have to be fully on the defense and just waiting for how your opponent will break through. And this was actually, I believe, his last moment to get activity, and there is an interesting variation.
Don't tell me. I'm trying to think of it, and I encourage viewers watching to also try and find the move for black here, because rook a d8 looks very natural.
Very natural, right?
Improve and align with the queen.
Well, think of it that way. Let me give you a hint. You have that bishop on f8. That's kind of looks pretty miserable, right? So ideally, you'd like to do what?
g6, bishop
Absolutely.
g7.
So g6. Let's look at that move.
Okay.
So if black would just get that bishop to g7 and not lose the d6 pawn, obviously that would be the move, right? The concern is that my bishop will come back to b2 now again, and then threaten queen d4 or queen c3 and mate,
It's dark
right?
squares.
Looks scary. And pretty much the only way to stop my queen getting there is to play bishop g7. But that means takes, take, rook d8, queen f4, my only square, knight d3.
Oh.
Not the end of the story. I saw all that, and I think my opponent realized it as well. Queen e3. By attacking his queen, obviously black has no time to take my rook. Queen takes, and rook takes, so my rook is safe. Now, interestingly enough, as the engines teach us, after knight c5 right now, black does have sufficient compensation because of controlling the d file, and the knight is fantastic on c5 and so on. Humanly, at the time, it wasn't so obvious, so he didn't want to give up a pawn kind of right in the start of the middle game, but this is what he should have done in hindsight.
Okay, yeah, that's a very elegant line. Also difficult to judge from a distance too.
Exactly.
Especially giving away such a center pawn, but
so he did not play g6.
Okay.
But
So
instead
rook.
played the rook d8.
Okay.
Indeed. And now, very, very important move. preventive of your opponent's ideas, exactly along the lines we discussed. Take a moment to think and see if you can figure it out based on what we just discussed.
So I would be inclined to bring the bishop back to b2 now.
Absolutely, that is the move. Bishop b2. And now from here on, black never ever gets a chance to play that g6 properly, because the queen d4 or queen c3 would dominate the long diagonal and followed with literally checkmate along those dark squares near the king.
Yeah, it's incredible how such small differences in move order can just affect the game long term at this level.
Yeah. And so from here on, black really did not have any active plan. The only one he could try is the a4, but then I made sure always I have the b4 pushed through. And the beauty is that if you look at white's position, white has 0 weaknesses.
It's an incredible piece harmony too. Like you double fianchetto, and you have this like clamp in the center as well.
And that's another important point, that I want to make sure I have maximum pressure on the d5 square, so black cannot liberate himself by pushing the d pawn forward.
Sure, yeah, black's one plan is very well prevented.
So the next few moves, it's a lot of maneuvering, and on my end, trying to improve my position. As you can see, he didn't have many active ideas. So queen c7. Naturally, I brought my last piece into the game. So now all my pieces are pretty much in great positions. Of course, the next phase will be, how do I make further progress?
Sure.
Right? So he played rook d7. So potentially he can double up on that d5 behind his weak pawn. I played bishop c3. Another fine little move, provoking another weakness, attacking the pawn, which he defended by b6. But by doing so, the pawn on c6 all of a sudden becomes a bit vulnerable. It looks a bit far-fetched, but as you can see it in a few moves, it has a point to it.
Okay.
I played king h2. It's just kind of, what are you going to do next? Yeah, see if my king is better there. He didn't know what to do. Queen c8. Yeah, as I said, he has no active plan. I played rook e3. He did rook e7, attacking my pawn. I cannot take on d6 because he would have a discovery. I think, does he have rook d7 or just take on e4? Yeah, rook d7 may be even more powerful.
Oh yeah, with the skewer too.
Yeah, so I defended simply, rook e1. He played queen c7, again, no useful move, defended his pawn. And I played f4, gaining more space now on the king side.
I just wanted to ask one question. This feels very Karpovian. Were you inspired by Karpov or anyone else?
Actually, I have, because I discovered chess in 1973, and basically by the time I got more and more into the game, by the mid-70s, he was the world champion.
Okay.
So throughout all my childhood, early teen years, he was the world champion. And obviously the world champion always influences that whole generation and style. And coincidentally, I think it fits my personality better than Kasparov's style or some Mikhail Tal style of playing chess. So he played f6. I think he was a bit concerned perhaps about me pushing e5. So he played f6. And now queen f2. So now you see what I'm talking about, the c6 pawn. I was trying to get my queen to double up. So after a potential e5, I may get that pawn. It ended up folding out differently later, but I was testing the waters.
It's nice to continually build up pressure and then eventually provoke some weaknesses or mistakes from the opponent.
Yes, the beauty of such positions is that really I have the time, and there is nothing black can do.
Gotcha.
Because most of black pieces are restricted to those last 3 rows. And as you see, he can just go back and forth, wait to see.
As we see from this move, yeah.
Yes. And now I played king h1, wanted to make sure my queen is out of the diagonal of the queen. That's a common advice to do. He's just waiting. And I played h4. So now this is a very important move, because on one hand, I'm contemplating to pushing that pawn forward to h5 and h6 to weaken his kingside. And also, as you will see in a moment, to get my bishop into whole new directions, attacking his rook. But that's not the point. The point is to play h5, followed by bishop f5. So now if he would make a random vading move, let's say with the queen, for example, my idea would be bishop g6, skewering up his rooks. And if he takes, I take back, attacking the rook, and then queen comes to the
More
h5
importantly,
mate.
mate. Yeah, that's
Yes.
a nice mating pattern.
So obviously he understood that in a heartbeat. He was short on time, but nevertheless, he moved his rook away out of the skewer. And now I decided to further improve my position. And that's an important skill in chess, to be patient and try to put all your pieces in ideal positions before you strike, especially when you can afford to do so. So I played rook d1, making sure that d5 liberation never happens. He played bishop e7. I played rook e2, which is an important move if I want to swing my rook to the h file. And he played rook back to f8. And I played rook h2, getting ready for that potential opening of the h file. He played rook e8. And this was that critical moment in the game where I played a very practical move. But as I've actually recently discovered, thanks to the genius of the engines of today, I actually had a more brilliant way to win. But of course, humanly, it's very, very hard to see, especially being short on time. And that brilliant line would have followed as such. Instead of the rook
you
d2,
were showing me
that.
this before. And,
Yes.
it's
So queen g4,
queen g4.
and I had all of this in mind, but I didn't see the final punch that the engine discovered. So I was afraid that, oh my God, he gets to play that d5, he'll get counterplay.
So I actually want to pause it here.
Good time.
And there is a really beautiful move that, for any viewers watching, if you want to try and find from the white side, white to move, and
win.
Definitely engine inspired, but a pretty incredible move. Would have been very nice to play over the board.
It requires a bit of calculation and imagination and magic.
Yeah, just to consider the move, you need to be quite imaginative, but it is a queen sacrifice, and
okay,
let's
continue. Queen g6. Wow, right?
Oh no, my queen.
Yeah, sacrificing the queen. Black has to take. Now discovered check from the rook. King g8. And now, shockingly, after giving up a queen just for a pawn, this is the shocker, the first shocker, the second shocker after the queen sacrifice. King g2.
Quiet move.
It's very, very unusual that we have time for a quiet move like this after giving up our queen.
Now, you had seen the position after king g8, and were you calculating king g2?
I have. And now, obviously, the plan is to double up my rooks on the h file and then checkmate up there in the corner. But what I've seen is that black will move the bishop, and by the time I bring my rook, king escapes.
Right.
And after king f8, I kind of gave up on my calculation and went for something safer. And this is the brilliant move.
So another moment for viewers to maybe pause the video and find the brilliant move from white. I think it's understandable that you missed it because you're already down a queen. You don't think about sacrificing more material. You maybe see rook h8, king e7, white runs out of steam. But the move would have been, I think this is correct, bishop takes f6.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, this prevents the escape of the black king to e7 and threatens the checkmate. And if black takes the bishop, then the check comes, and regardless where the king goes, the second rook comes down to h7 and it's checkmate. So this would have been a more brilliant finish, but with that said, I think mine was more practical in that circumstances. Of course, if I would have seen, I probably would have played it. But without having the engine on your side and being sure that it really works, it was...
So how many years after the game did you discover
I just discovered it. Can you imagine? A couple months ago, as I was preparing to show it in a lecture.
Okay.
Even, many years after I mean, 87, we're talking about what, nearly 40 years.
Right,
That's
right.
scary. Nearly 40 years later. Yeah.
It's incredible what the engines will show in these like
Yeah.
old games that were missed. But
Even the engines of the time didn't see this.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you need like pretty high depth to for the
Yeah.
engine to understand that it's okay to give away the queen and the bishop to
Yes.
eventually checkmate.
So I played the rook
Okay.
hd2 instead,
Mhm.
and my opponent played knight d7, trying to bring the knight back to defend the king as well. And I played bishop b2, kind of a evading move. He played knight f8, and now I finally proceeded with my attack, h6, trying to disrupt his harmonious pawn structure on the king's side.
Combines very well with your fiend-headed bishop.
Yes, and he pushed through, not to open himself up. I retreated, and now there is a pin along that long diagonal, so he went out of the pin with his king. And now an important move, g4. So my goal is, ever since this middle game started, to open up that long diagonal and get my queen to there and checkmate. And that's what I'm trying to do. g5, a discovery from my bishop to the knight. Knight moved away. Now I'm winning a pawn. But the point is not really the pawn as much as finally I'm happily giving that pawn back. And if queen takes now, then I get my queen c3 in finally. And the checkmate is coming on h8.
No stopping, or no good way to stop queen h8. Yeah, that's really nice.
So he took with the king, my pawn. And now I proceeded with the f5, opening up all the files on the king's side against his king. He trying to hide, ran back. I took back, and came queen f6. So finally I got this battery between my bishop and the queen. He defended the corner square so he doesn't get checkmated, but after rook g2 he had no more good defense. Rook takes pawn coming, and it's game over, and he resigned.
Must have been a very satisfying finish, even if it's not a amazing queen sacrifice, just a slow build up and getting
Exactly.
position like
I
this.
really enjoyed that kind of, I never gave him a chance, you know. So especially after his pre-game comments of belittling women,
Right.
it felt extra satisfying to win in this style.
How did he react after the game? Do you remember? Did you
To be
exchange
fair
any
to him, he
words?
was good sport. He was good sport. Obviously, I'm sure he was hurt and wasn't happy that night,
course.
but eventually we became good friends, and I think I gained his respect.
Okay. Did he apologize later about his
I don't think we
comments,
ever
or-
talked about those
Gotcha.
comments, unlike many people did, and I'm sure some people kind of brought it up to him, but it wasn't me.
All right, so thanks so much for sharing this game. I do have a few other positions and games to highlight from your chess career, and maybe we can move on to the next one that you played at the Olympiad. And is this one of like your best games of all time, would you say?
I think so. I'm very proud of this game. I played it against my, I could say, arch rival, Maja Ciburdanidzé. We played many games. We played a match on my way to becoming a women's world champion. She has been, of course, many times world champion herself, a legendary player, a very nice lady. We also became good friends eventually, but this game has been very special. It's the first and only time when I played in an Olympiad for the United States. My other 3 Olympiads were for Hungary, and this Olympiad was after an 8-year break from playing competitive chess. I kind of came back from retirement, and it was a big surprise that actually I had my best ever performance, winning 2 golds, individual golds, as well as winning 2 silvers in the same Olympiad, making history by helping the US win their first ever Olympiad medals in the women's division.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to mention the fact that I didn't realize until recently that you've played so many Olympiads and have never lost a single game in an Olympiad. Was that on your mind, especially in your last Olympiad, that there's more pressure that you don't lose any games?
Not during the tournament, honestly. During the tournament, I just had to focus on one game at a time. I had to make sure I do my best. If I think back, it's pretty surprising or amazing that I played every single game on board one on all 4 Olympiads I played, which is very rare because
Right.
typically in many countries the top players sit out the early rounds or if they are tired or whatnot. But I played all 14 games in every Olympiad, 56 games total, and I got lucky not even to lose a single one. So
That's
I'm
incredible.
certainly proud of
Yeah.
that.
So this is probably one of the most beautiful games that you've played, not only in Olympiad, but of all time.
Exactly.
So perhaps we can go through the opening and see.
So
what
it was really
unfolded.
interesting because Maya is a very solid player and it's not easy to beat her. So I felt that the element of surprise is really, really important. And before the game, with the help of our team captain Paul Truong and as well as the coaches, Paul came up with the idea and then we kind of worked on it with the coaches. Came up with an unexpected idea.
Some ready English opening.
So
this G4 move.
So this G4 move, it's certainly unexpected, and in this particular position was a new move at the time. It's not necessarily the best, but it was a huge surprise, and Maya took a lot of time figuring out what to do. And obviously she didn't know how good or bad it may be, and that was part of the psychology, that it's a little bit of a gamble, but me looking at it for an hour or two before the game while she has to figure everything out on her own at the board may work out, which luckily did.
The power of opening surprises.
Yes, so she did bishop b7 and I pushed her knight away. Obviously the knight is restricted where it can go, because again, actually the similar battery as in the previous game we discussed.
Definitely some overlapping things.
Right. So the knight needs to move in a way that it will still protect that pawn on g7, which she did, of course, went to h5, which is the best place for the knight. And I played rook g1, preparing for a potential opening of the g file, as well as getting out of the fire of black's bishop on the long diagonal on b7. And now, very logically, she played e5, trying to neutralize my battery between the bishop and the queen on that long diagonal of dark squares. So far, so good. And I played bishop h3. So now all my pieces are kind of developed, but as you can notice, I kind of left my king in the middle. Again, breaking a principle, not a good idea in general. Exception, again, from the rule. And it's a very risky one. I probably would not have done it a second time when my opponent can already prepare for it.
You also haven't moved any center pawns yet, which is also pretty rare for 12 moves into the game.
Yeah, and as you can see, I already lost my right to castle on the king's side. And I still have my right to castle on the queen's side, but my C and B pawn, all 3 pawns, in fact, A, B, C pawns have all moved already. Therefore, even if I would castle, I wouldn't necessarily get into safety with my king. So it's kind of a risky endeavor and kind of putting all my eggs in one basket.
Gotcha.
She played knight to f4 and I played bishop f5. And this was the critical moment of the game where she took a long time. I think it was like nearly an hour. She was thinking and made a mistake. She played g6, attacking my bishop. And she, of course, foresaw what I may do. And this is a critical moment when you may want to think, pause for a moment and try to see if you can figure out what to do.
There should be kind of alarm bells going off that g6 is very weakening of the dark squares. You have the dark square battery. And I did see the game before today, so I know it's coming. But for any viewers watching, if you want to pause the video and find really nice, at least the beginning of the beautiful combination for white.
So basically, this is another very good advice, that look out for intermediate moves, right? Because generally one of a typical beginner's mistake is that when your opponent attacks one of your pieces, valuable pieces like bishop or rook or queen or whatever, where to move it, right? It's a typical thing. People even, in the beginning stages of their chess experience, they would touch that bishop and look where to move it, where it's not going to be taken, right?
Sure.
And don't even think of alternative options. And that was the key to look out for. Do I have any other option than moving my bishop? So I did, and I sacrificed my knight. So not only my bishop is hanging, so is my knight. And so obviously she saw that, and she thought she was very smart and looked for a surprise that I guess she hoped I didn't see. So if she would take my knight right now with the pawn, I would just take back on e5.
And battery is so strong.
Exactly, as well as her knight is hanging on f4, so that wouldn't help her. So let's take it back. If she would have taken my bishop, then I think also I have some knight jump to g4, I believe.
It's all about using the diagonal.
Yes. So instead, and that was another very interesting move, instead of taking anything, neither my bishop nor my knight, there was another very interesting move, queen e7 or queen e8, either one of those. Very interesting move because it kind of pins my knight, right? I cannot move my knight because I get checkmated all of a sudden on e2.
So much alignment. Yeah, this knight wants to move, but it doesn't want to move.
Yeah, and if I move my bishop, then already she can take my knight because after queen e5, she trades the queens and my attack is gone, right? And here there is an amazing move.
Okay, this I did not see beforehand.
Move.
I'm looking for ways to somehow sacrifice more. Okay, all the knight moves are out of the question. Bishop. Oh, can we play bishop e4?
Bishop e4. That's the amazing move, yes.
So leaving the bishop hanging, but all about obstructing the e-file.
Correct.
That's really nice.
Yes, and
we should just show some lines.
Yeah,
if
bishop takes, again, the knight can jump to various places. G6 maybe. Let me see, not G6 here. G4 maybe, or C6. C6 wins the queen, so that's just already...
Right. I wasn't sure about knight g6, pawn
Exactly.
g6.
Maybe knight g4. Knight c6 is the simplest, but I think the engine may even tell us some better move.
Just verify with Stockfish. Knight g4 is even stronger.
Yeah, knight g4 I thought was the strongest.
Threatening two different mates.
Three.
Oh, three different mates, yeah. Good point.
Yeah, so there are some other fascinating variations, so if you're interested, you can certainly check with if takes, then takes, start trapping the rook. And if queen takes, then queen e5, f-pawn move, have to move, and then I at least can take the knight already up several pawns and in a winning position.
I'm going to leave a link to the Lee chess study, so if anyone watching wants to analyze these lines on their own, they can click below and take a look. But yeah, that's very, very beautiful. If we go back.
So she thought she outsmarted me with a counter combination. Knight takes e2.
So rather than taking the minor pieces, you insist on, or your opponent insists on sacrificing.
So look at the position here for a moment. My queen is under attack, my rook is under attack, my knight is under attack, and my bishop. Wow. So literally 4 of my pieces are under attack. So her point is that if I just take her knight, she takes my knight, and if I do the queen e5, all of a sudden, oops, pin.
And you're
over.
You're not mating on g7, unfortunately.
Nope. Resigning. So this is what she overlooked after knight e2. In fact, as she told me later, she did not overlook, but I'll tell you later what she actually overlooked or miscalculated. So as I said, 4 of my pieces are under attack, and yet I made another combination.
And the next move is probably the most beautiful move of the game, because you don't save your most valuable pieces and you don't take the knight.
Yes, I played knight takes f7.
Another pretty amazing queen sacrifice.
Yes, she took my queen. Knight h6 check. King g7. Bishop takes c3. Check. Now he must block. She must block.
Only legal moves are to give back a lot of material.
So she obviously chose the lesser of the value of the two.
Then she loses back the queen.
So hold on 1 second. So yeah, actually queen f6, g takes, King h6. So she did see actually all of this.
Oh, wow.
However, from the distance of when she played g6, which is many moves before, like what, 8, 9 of her moves?
Yeah, that was move 13. So when she played g6,
That's
she
move
was
13.
calculating this line.
All of this line.
All the way until...
King h6.
where is it? King h6. So...
It's like
sometimes
7 of her moves.
It's hard to see and evaluate precisely.
Right, so there was a lot to calculate. So long story short, she in her imagination thought she still has her rook on f8.
Oh.
So she didn't realize that she's down on exchange. She thought she would be up a knight.
Yeah, this is common pitfall for amateurs, but also for strong players too.
Yes.
You see this phantom piece.
Yes.
When you're calculating so deeply.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a big oversight.
So from the combinations perspective, obviously it's game over here. I'm up an exchange and a pawn, which is 3 points at a grandmaster level. That's obviously a decisive advantage. And unfortunately, I didn't look for any more brilliances, and I just...
You converted
I converted in
manner.
a technical manner, moved my bishop away. And one of those things that I forgot to look for an intermediate move, but I'd like to show the pretty way I could have won, the prettier way, which is rook b1.
Keep sacrificing.
Leave my bishop there, and if she takes my bishop, bring my rook horizontally up, and mate with rook h3. And there's another interesting variation that if she does not take my bishop, but tries to defend against this and brings bishop f3, rook b3, bishop h5, and now all of a sudden bishop e4.
Trapping the rook.
Yeah.
Very nice.
I wasted an extra maybe half an hour in converting the game, but I won anyway on the technical end. So
yeah, would have been nice icing on the cake.
Yes, but
still,
nevertheless, it was a pretty memorable victory.
Yeah, especially this knight f7 combination. Yeah, it's really great to just see and appreciate the moments from your games. And,
thank you.
I hope
it's always a pleasure to relive it.
hope it brings pleasure reliving
Definitely.
it too, for sure. Now, the book covers a lot of the backstory of your experience at the Olympiad, but you also talk about your meetings and relationship with Bobby Fischer. And there's a diagram at the very end of the book, which I brought in to this Lee chess study, which maybe we can end on. But I also want to ask you about what it was like meeting Bobby Fischer, and also there's a whole story of you guys kind of forming the rules of Fischer random chess. So,
it was one of the most exciting experiences, obviously, growing up in the 1970s when he just became world champion. I started to play chess when he was world champion, and then I remember those days. There was always that question, that discussion in the chess club: will he defend his title in 75? Will he not? And then when he didn't, all the disappointment. But will he still make a comeback and play a match? And I know there were efforts to make a match happen throughout the late 70s to bring him back, and then, as we know, he disappeared, and so it was a mystery. He was like a myth, like a legend, but nobody knew what he does, and there were rumors. So when all of a sudden he came back in 1992 and had a second match with Boris Spassky, which happened to be in Yugoslavia, a neighboring country at the time with Hungary, and then after that he went into hiding. And to my biggest surprise, he reached out through a mutual friend, wanted to meet my family. So basically he requested that I come visit him as well. And so we did. I was the only one with a car at the time in my family. So I drove to this little town where he was hiding out, so to say, in a motel-like hotel. And when I went, that's when we played our very first game of many, and we became friendly for a long time after that. And I asked him, why don't you move to Budapest? Mm-hmm. It's a lot more metropolitan city. You know some people like the late Paul Benke or Lajos Portis, and I'd be happy to help you get settled in. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me, really? You think I can? I said, well, I don't know. If you want, I can ask it on my drive back to Budapest. And so I did. And, on the border, on our drive back, I asked what would happen if a gentleman by the name Robert James Fischer would be in the car with us. Mm-hmm. The immigration officer didn't quite understand the question. What would there be? If he has a valid passport, he would get into Hungary. So he got encouraged of this, and 2 weeks later he indeed packed up and moved to Budapest, where he resided for about 8 years after that. And especially the first year or so of his stay in Budapest, I helped him a lot. We spent countless meals together. I took him to the amazing spas in Budapest, which he fell in love with, and obviously we experimented a lot with the rules of Fischer random, and the rules people play with nowadays, chess 960, is based on the result of those experiments with Bobby.
That's incredible. Yeah, and we have a position here which you mentioned in the book that you didn't want to share the full games with Bobby out of respect for him, because that was his request, but this is just a glimpse of one of your games that you played. And can you maybe tell the story behind this?
Yeah,
this
so it's important to point out that as we know today, when people play chess 960, they play with the rules that we finalized, which means that the pieces start in symmetrical positions. Mm-hmm. Castling still is allowed, therefore the king needs to start the game in between the two rooks, and the two bishops also of each side needs to start on opposite color squares. Mm-hmm. It was not how we started playing. Initially we started to play Fischer random when we only had the pawns on the board, and the first 8 moves of the game were setting those pieces up in any random choice we chose to, not necessarily in a symmetrical manner.
Interesting. Okay, so then that's a whole other layer of strategy.
Exactly. So it was very different, and I have 2 examples of positions in the book, and the first one, which I show in the book, is where it was non-symmetrical starting positions, and I happened to win that game. Mm-hmm. And then this one was played with the rules that we all play today, Fischer random or chess 960. When we started with symmetrical positions, as you can see, the 2 bishops are still, and the 2 rooks are still in their symmetrical positions between the white and the black pieces. And here Bobby found a rather pretty move.
So Bobby Fischer is white,
yes.
You were black,
yes.
you had recorded this game.
I recorded it after the game, just this position.
Just to save the
because it was such a pretty one.
And were you doing like classical Fischer random? Or
most
was
of our games we played
games?
very casually. Many times when we ordered dinner and while waiting for our meals, or in very casual settings.
Yeah. So this is white to move. For viewers watching, if you want to put yourself in Bobby Fischer's shoes and find a pretty incredible combination for white. And it's actually reminiscent of your previous game that we just showed from the Olympiad, the same sort of tactical pattern with the knight, the queen, the bishop. And yeah, feel free to
so he played knight takes f7, and basically it was game over, because if I take the queen,
sacrifice.
then he checkmates with a very pretty checkmate.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I take the knight,
and the knight could be taken by the rook,
correct.
But then
queen takes queen,
pawn
takes, and rook takes, and again I lost material, and it's a completely lost position, technically speaking.
So yeah, very nice moment to share, especially against such a legend, Bobby Fischer.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much for taking the time to share all these incredible stories and moments from your chess career. I feel like we barely even scraped the surface of your chess life. But if you want to get Rebel Queen, more information will be below. You can order it online or get it at your local bookstore or on Audible and listen to the audiobook version.